Hello, we'll just wait for some people to flow in here and then we'll get started. Hello and welcome to Using AI to Survive and Thrive in a COVID-19 World, Fireside Chat with Neil Sahota and Scott Sandland. I'm Julie Cranston, Director of the SBDC at UCI Applied Innovation, and I'd like to thank you so much for joining us today. Today's webinar is brought to you by the SBDC at UCI Applied Innovation. The SBDC is funded in part by the U.S. Small Business Administration in the state of California. The SBDC is here to help you start, grow, and succeed in your business by providing no-cost expert consulting and training such as this webinar. In addition to our regular consulting on business management and equity funding, we also have been helping our small business clients understand and apply for SBA loans like the Economic Injury Disaster Loan or EIDL program, and also the Paycheck Protection Program or PPP loan. We can also advise on how to administer these loans if you have received them, so make sure to reach out to us if you need assistance. We have a hotline set up and additional resources available. The hotline number is 1-800-616-7232. That's 1-800-616-7232. If you're a tech or life science business, you can go straight to our intake form at sbdctech.org/contact. And we have a COVID-19 resource guide available at ociesmallbusiness.org. We'll put all of this information in the chat feature. A little housekeeping before we begin. Everyone is muted during the webinar. Tomorrow, the recorded webinar and a PDF copy of the slides will be sent to all participants. There will be Q&A at the end of the presentations, and I think we're going to take some questions throughout. So please put those in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We may not get to everyone's questions, but we will do our best. And if we don't get to your questions, please email hkhaled@fullerton.edu, and we will attempt to answer them and get back to you. Our program today will be presented by Neil Sahota and Scott Sandland. Neil is a sought-after global expert who has worked with global Fortune 500 companies, world government leaders, and startups around the world. He has been on panels with world-known business leaders, and he creates value as a United Nations AI expert, master inventor, and best-selling author. Scott Sandland is the CEO of Cyrano.ai and a thought leader in artificial empathy. His background in clinical hypnotherapy and online software development give him a unique perspective on how to weave emotional intelligence into deep science and technology. He is the youngest life fellow in the history of the International Medical and Dental Hypnotherapy Association and has been published in numerous peer-reviewed journals. Scott has started multiple companies with one exit and stepped down from his role as executive director of a mental health clinic to build an AI tool that will provide mental support services at scale to vulnerable populations. Thank you so much, Neil and Scott, for being here today. I'll turn the program over to you now.
Hey, thanks, Julie. Very much appreciate that. And good afternoon, everybody, or morning or evening, depending where in the world you might be. My name is Neil Sahota. So I and Scott are just going to do a quick little interview before we kind of jump into the fireside chat. So just to kind of set the table here, so to speak. And I know that right now we're in the new normal. At least California is trying to reopen up. And a lot of people are talking about how can I kind of restart or revive my business after being potentially shut down for almost 3 months. And I think that's not really about so much revival, but there's a real chance for innovation and opportunity here. And I very much believe what Winston Churchill actually says, that a pessimist sees the difficulty in every opportunity, and the optimist sees the opportunity in every difficulty. And I know that even though in these challenging times, there's actually great opportunities for us. Actually, some of the biggest companies got their real start in times of really economic downturn, like Google and Airbnb. And I really look at like COVID-19 has kind of shown the light on the deficiencies and gaps that we've had, right? We've had things that were workarounds are good enough, and suddenly they got strained or even broken during this course. And so we have a time to kind of rebuild, refocus, or pivot to something better. And I think one of those opportunities for us to do that is through artificial intelligence. That's essentially where a machine, a computer, can make mental decisions. It can do low-level types of tasks that require some level of cognition without human interference or involvement. And the really way it does that is through two things, which is machine learning, meaning that we don't give it a decision tree or a path to follow. We're letting the machine ingest lots and lots of data and learn the patterns from that data and actually essentially write its own algorithms. And so it learns through reading and seeing and experiencing and some human teaching. Second is the ability to understand natural language, which is something that we as people take for granted. Think about how much jargon and slang and idiom we use. Like if I told you that I'm feeling blue, most of you know I realize that I'm feeling sad. If you tell that to a machine, it's going to think that I physically turned the color blue. Well, AI doesn't look at literal words or keywords. It's really trying to take context from the conversation, right? It's trying to derive connotation, not literal meaning. And then last is the ability to actually interact more naturally with humans than other programmable systems. For better or worse, we're used to using keywords or giving commands like, hey, Alexa, turn off the lights. We now have machines that can converse with us, change interactively, even learn some of our emotional states and dynamically change how it talks to us. And Scott will talk more about like the artificial empathy side of that. But imagine having a machine you can talk to like a best friend. And so, can we actually do with this? How do we innovate? I'm going to play a really short video. Don't worry about the audio. It's not really important, and there's not much to it anyways. But watch what this guy is doing and what's happening with that robot arm. So the great thing about AI is it's giving us a whole new set of capabilities and tools to unlock whole new capabilities, things that we've never been able to do before. This is a great example of one of those. If you're wondering how this guy is controlling the robotic arm, there's no AI trying to read his neural synapses or the firings there. If you look above his right elbow, you'll see a little black band. And what's actually going on is we know that the brain can actually still send signals to a stump. So whether you lost a limb or were born without one, the brain can still try and send commands to that phantom limb. And what that band is doing is actually interpreting the muscle motion and the tendon movement and using AI to decipher what they're trying to do and translate that into a motion into the robotic arm. So in effect, we found a way to restore lost mobility to someone that has lost or was born without a limb. This is just an inkling of what we can do with AI, because we always say fourth industrial revolution, all these catchphrases. There's some hype, but there's a lot of truth to that. We have whole new ways of suddenly doing things and doing them differently that we can tap into. And that's why I always talk about there's a real chance for innovation, for just being more than survival. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are thinking, that's great. I'm not a super smart programmer or roboticist. Well, most people think AI is about coding. 100% coding, it is not. It's actually more about data. That's the fuel for AI. There's a little bit of coding there, but more about experimentation. And so the way you're really going to be able to use this technology is through my magic formula, right? And it's not problem solution, it's mindset plus problem defined plus domain expertise creates the opportunities. And then it's the opportunities plus technical expertise plus infrastructure that really creates that solution for you. And the mindset is the entrepreneurial thinking. Let's step away from the mindset of why things won't work or why we're not going to need it, but say like, if I have some crazy idea, am I willing to think about the different ways I might be able to make it work? Maybe I don't figure something out, but at least I tried. That mindset with the problem defined, what is it that I'm really trying to do, what are the real root causes, plus domain knowledge, right? Like in this example, I have to understand about biology and anatomy and other things to figure out the art of the possible or what's my opportunity. And once I have my opportunity, then marry it with the technical expertise, bring the smart technologists in, and they'll help you understand what is actually feasible from your kind of green screen or pie in the sky idea, and the tools that can help make it a reality, plus then the infrastructure. right? What do I need? Do I need 5G internet? Do I need quantum computers? Is the CPU in my iPhone enough? Right? Combine these things together to actually come out with the viable solution or the possible. So that's just kind of touching upon this. I know that Scott's going to give you a little more deep dive about what he's done and how he's had to pivot in COVID, and we'll have a fireside chat about what people can do. But I do encourage everyone to be an optimist. We all have the opportunity to create a new normal, and I know that we only have limited time. So if we don't get time to a question that you ask or anything like that, you can reach out to me, and there's my contact info. And with that, I'll hand it over to Scott to tell his story.
All right. Hello, everybody. Let me share my screen. And I'm just going to walk you through basically what I've done in two separate businesses and use that as kind of a launching point for some of the conversations we're going to have today. Let's see. Can I do it through clicking? Oh, look, it's going to be difficult. There we go. So two businesses that I've been running in the physical world. The first is a clinical hypnotherapy practice. And for the sake of this conversation, just think of that as therapy. How I do it doesn't really matter. It's an in-person, people come in, they hang out for an hour, we talk about their problems, they go away. Normal therapy. And then the other product that and company that I've been running in the real world is artificial empathy, specifically targeting sales. And we'll talk about why in a minute. But the idea is an AI that can understand what people are saying and based on that, create strategy for how to interact with them to optimize outcomes. And so I was running both of these companies and things were going very well. You understand the therapy idea, the artificial empathy, like I said, we were selling stuff. This is what we did. We would give a tool on a cell phone to guys at a Honda dealership, and they would be able to sell more cars in less time because our AI would tell them what to do and what not to do. Easy to understand. We had taken that and it had gone so well, we were building out onto physical hardware. On the Google hardware, we had built it and deployed it for these kinds of things: sales training, employee onboarding, bedside manner and treatment planning, mental health coaching. We were looking at all the different places where people were having important conversations and seeing how we could augment those important conversations. We were very proud of the work we were doing. We had some great pilots. We had some great customers. We had some great potential customers. And then this happened, which, happened to basically everybody in America on just about the same day. It happened to everybody on Earth, over the course of a few weeks. But March 13th was a big day for a lot of businesses. And I use the NBA suspending the season as a real turning point, I think, for a lot of people, because I think when they saw a multi-billion-dollar industry shutting down, I think that woke a lot of people up to this is real. And I think they've done a great job in how they've been doing things. But we had to pivot. Both of my businesses basically shut down on March 13th, and I had to figure out what to do. And it was ultimately, I have to meet people where they already are. And that became to be Zoom. And everyone knew Zoom was where people are. And so I had to figure out how to do that. So the first one's real simple. I had to move my therapy practice online. Everyone's talking about that now. They're calling it telehealth or telepsychiatry or teletherapy. There's some wonderful companies doing that. I was able to do it just for my private practice. Very straightforward. But this was much more complicated. The actual tech side, we were building stuff that was programmed into, like I said, the physical world. Cell phones and Google Assistants and all those sorts of things. And to turn that into a new company, because all the B2B opportunities we had dried up before March 17th. All the deals we had in our pipeline all said, we're scrambling, no new initiatives. We'll talk to you in hopefully November, but probably January. And so the whole pipeline for this really shut down. And I think this is much more like what a lot of people are dealing with. And so we really had to think this through. And turns out Zoom is still the right answer for us. Zoom's got a marketplace. And we looked and we just said, okay, can we take everything we were doing and turn it into a Zoom tool? And we did. And we figured out a business model that allowed us to make it a free opportunity for a lot of people to use it. So a free tier and then paid tiers on top of it. So we pivoted our entire company away from onboarding and sales training and all those things that we were doing and did this. And as we were building this core out, and this is a thing I think we'll want to talk about and kind of dissect, is how it turned into a full plan. Because what we realized was what we're not trying to do is ride this out. Let's just ride out COVID and then we'll be okay. And we'll just go back to business as usual. Like Neil said, it's a new normal. And in fact, over 80% of Americans say they don't want things to go back to the way they were. They want this to be an opportunity to be transformative. And people have different ideas about what that might mean. But our thought was we have to take what we did and turn it into a systematic plan that we can run through as our new go-to-market for our company. And so Meeting Insights is that number one that you can see right here. And 2, 3, and 4, call center, telehealth, et cetera, all built on the same platform, designed to train our recursive neural network, which is our AI. So how we generate the data is that middle row, which goes back to Neil's pie chart in his graph. And coming up with this is a really important thing for businesses to be talking about, where we're not just thinking, how am I going to get through this, but how am I going to systematically approach what will be the new world so that our company can be one of the companies like Salesforce, Google, Disney was started like right before the Great Depression. There's all these huge companies that are very successful that started during these kinds of moments. And I think the reason for that is those external constraints force us to channel our resources. Like I really think of my or your resources as water going through a hose, and having the right constraints, having the right focus points the water in one direction rather than just being a puddle. And in these kinds of moments, that's what you need to do. It's what we all need to do. And that's where I think this conversation can go today. So there we go. So Neil, let's talk about this piece. Let's just jump right into it. 80% of people don't want America to go back to the way it was. We want to use this for transformative change. So what do you think that looks like, and what do we need to do about it?
You want to ask a simpler question, Scott?
No one came for your easy questions. It all came for your hard questions and hard answers.
I'd like to think that as we kind of rebuild, we're rebuilding more sustainably. And I think that we're actually taking a look and saying, there's a lot more about what is actually needed and what's superfluous, so to speak. And
yeah.
I think it's interesting change. There's a startup here in Orange County called Smartpoint, where they're talking about real-time micro-location information. And, they've been working with Uber and Lyft and some of those rideshare companies and talking about, okay, how do I sync up, 2 people together at a location? And now they're suddenly thinking about, well, with COVID-19 and nobody really taking rideshare at the moment, what are we going to do? And they started thinking about, well, what if it's rather than trying to connect 2 people at some micro location, what if it's trying to put something on a spot, right? So you want contactless food delivery, but you don't want to just leave it on your front porch. Maybe you want it somewhere else. Or drone delivery, right? Or maybe you're going around and you're wondering, can I navigate through a grocery store, find what I want in the most optimal path that also helps me social distantly properly, right? So they went in a whole different direction now because of all this. And what they actually ironically learned is that by doing this, they can not only help improve navigation, even inside a store, they can actually help people reduce their gas consumption. I think they actually were looking at that, just like I think with Uber and Lyft alone, they could potentially help them save close to 50 million gallons of gas a year.
Right.
So that's a huge cost savings for the company, but that's also a lot less carbon emissions, right? And so I think this whole idea of social enterprise, social entrepreneurship, as we're trying to figure out a new way of doing a lot of these things, is that can we factor some of these other things in to kind of get a double win? And that's kind of my vision in trying to rebuild, Scott.
And I think there's a lot of people that are aware of the concept of purpose-driven brands. You know, I think Tom's Shoes is sort of a cliche one that's used a lot, where when you buy the shoes, you're also like advertising, I want to help people and I want to support companies that are giving and philanthropic in nature. And I think a lot of businesses are starting to see the value of that. And I also think a lot of people want to work for those companies. And so when you're looking at drawing in the best talent, either being a company that's socially conscious or has some sort of flexibility in terms of work-life balance, work from home kinds of things, I think those are going to be increasingly important in talent acquisition right now.
I really believe that. And it's interesting that there's a lot of companies now turning to AI to help with their recruiting, as well as actually their retention.
Yeah.
And so, you know, and you being a psychologist probably know, they're trying to figure out who's going to be able to fit in well with the culture, maybe in a virtual environment, the training. How do I know if my employees are happy, productive? I mean, Scott, you probably, you know way more about the psychology behind this than I do.
Sure. I mean, actually, that's one of the things we use our tool for right now. The basics of that meeting insight tool is about finding out people's priorities and how they fit together. I use sports as a metaphor a lot because it's on TV. And I think there's a lot of examples of a player not fitting on a team, and then they go to a different team and they shine. And maybe it's the system, maybe it's the coach, maybe it's the other players. For whatever it is, there just isn't a fit, even though there is the talent. And I think it's nice in sports because there's, you know, statistics that support that. But I think that the same thing is absolutely true in business, where there's subtraction by addition and addition by subtraction of certain people, and knowing how to find those people and who will work in whatever the new normal is and whatever your specific company's new normal is, because some people might not make that transition.
100%, but like the pivot you made for Cyrano, that was hard, right?
Really hard. It was, I mean, that pivot, I mean, genuinely funding and 3 deals, all like everything we had worked on for the previous 8 months. We had 8 months of runway all die in 2.5 days. It was not a fun series of 4 phone calls. And so, like, you know, my business partners, my COO and my CIO, we were sitting around and we were talking, and we're like, okay, what are we going to do about this? What are we going to do? And it actually forced us to say, okay, at the most simple, what is it our tool does? Because, and it became a good exercise because, you know, our tool is analyzing words functionally and doing stuff with that. But we're like, okay, well, we can go anywhere there are words. So let's just go anywhere there are words. And this forced us to go, no, we can't go wherever there are words. We have to go where there are people, and we can't be a nice to have. We, you know, wallets are closed right now. We have to be a need to have, not a nice to have. No one's going to spend extra money on a nice to have right now. So
like I know, but it's funny that a lot of people you normally wouldn't think about turning to AI are actually doing that. I've actually had a couple of film studios come to me and say, look, we're actually not able to do post-production work.
Right.
Things that we normally do. And they're like, we need people together. We need these things. Can AI help us out? And I'm like, what exactly do you want to do? And it's like, yeah, actually AI can help you out. And then of course they're like, but I'm not a smart programmer. How do I get one? I'm like, well, that's not the right place to start.
That on your formula, I think that's a really important thing for people to take away, is that the technical ability is semi-outsourceable or findable. The domain knowledge, you know, the clear problem and goal, like all those things are what an entrepreneur has, or a small business owner has. And then they can team with people who have the technical ability, and they just need to figure out how to be talking to each other about the right questions and about the right goals, and how to organize the data they have. I think that's a key thing. Is a lot of people think, well, I've been keeping track of my customers, therefore I've got a lot of data. You're like, that's not the same thing as data. And I think people should start understanding what data really means and how it needs to be tied to outcomes, because that's really what AI wants to do, is win the game you're giving it. And so it needs to know what a win and a loss really is.
Let's start with the end in mind, which and I can't tell you how many people I've seen that they come in, I've got all this data, let's do something. Like, well, what, right? You could have a Ferrari, but if you have no destination, it's not going to do a lot of good.
Yeah. It's like if you type into Google Maps, get me out of here, it doesn't know what to do. Like, you need to tell it where you want to go. And that's the business owner's job, is to say, I want to be able to do this, and then find people who can tell you if that's possible and what needs to happen to make that possible.
Also,
but you were asking about like movie studios, and movie studios have a big budget, obviously. And, you're an IBM Watson guy and all that. And so you're talking about, organizations that have, millions of dollars or in aggregate billions of dollars. So they can have R&D. But I think, like at the quote unquote normal person, at the small business level, just having tech needs to have like a financial use case really well tied to it. And so because of that, like, people who are inherently technologists are looking for work right now too. And so plugging in back into your equation, that outsourced piece, those people are looking for work more than they were 6 months ago. And so they are more hireable than they would otherwise be. Not top tier AI experts, but people who can get the job done for people on this call are absolutely accessible right now.
That's a great point. And there are actually a lot of tools out there too to help accelerate that work that aren't going to break the bank. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs don't realize that, the Googles, the IBMs, the Microsofts, the Alibabas of the world actually have all these APIs, even for stuff like, visual recognition that, even the smallest startup can tap into.
Yeah, and basic chatbot stuff, right? Dialogflow is also a Google tool that is, and AWS has one. A lot of them have these build your own chatbot kind of things that are a good starting point for people to start exploring, so they don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, and it is interesting because I think your point about you have to have a viable idea and understand the financial case. I actually had one guy ask me, like, with everyone at home, what if you're worried about car repairs? Do you really want to go to a dealership? He's like, I want an AI so that, like, if I have to replace the spark plugs in my car, the AI can tell me how to do that. And I'm thinking, like, there's so many different kinds of cars and stuff. I'm like, how would this work? And he's like, well, I'd tell the AI what I want to do in my car, and then it would pull up like the right video to watch, like on YouTube. And I'm like, well, that's called YouTube.
That's YouTube. Yeah, we already made that.
You don't need to use AI for everything.
Yeah, I want to build an AI that serves up educational videos when I tell it what I'm interested in learning. You're like, good news, buddy. That's a really good idea. So
we're laughing with you, that person.
Whoever that is, yeah. We have questions in the chat. Do we want to pull those up? Just missing them.
So our first question is, we have an airport transfer sightseeing day trips company. We have been around for 20 years. We would like to use AI voice recognition so travelers can make their reservations over the phone and computer without the need to use a live agent. Any suggestions?
That's a doable thing. So build your own chatbot is a perfect example of that. AWS has one. I know Google has one. I know there's others out there that can do that kind of thing on like a reservation website. Voice recognition for it is also doable, and entity mapping it is also doable, but I don't think you necessarily need to. I mean, I think just saying book online, people are pretty satisfied with that as a tool right now. What do you think, Neil?
I mean, I think you're right. I mean, most people are doing things to their phone anyways, like even an app or whatever, or just even a Safari or Chrome site. But if you really want voice, you can actually do that. There are voice tools out there that if someone calls, they think they're talking to a person, or you can let them know they're talking to a machine, but handle those transactions. The only thing I'd watch for is variability, right? If like 80% of the cases are kind of the same, it's fairly straightforward to train an AI. you'll still need some humans to handle that other 20%.
So there's, going back to Dialogflow, they have a really great example of build your own pizza. And so you would just type in or speak in, hey, I want a pizza, large pepperoni. But I didn't say what size crust and I didn't say what kind of sauce. And so it has a mental checklist. And so it will prompt you with questions. Do you want thin crust or thick crust? Now you have to program in what those check boxes it needs answers for are. But in a travel scenario, that might be an easy thing. How many days, how many different locations per day, what your ballpark budget is. There would be ways to create that like a menu and then serve that up like a questionnaire. And basically that's all you're doing is making an AI chatbot that is, it's a pretty dumb bot. It doesn't have to be very complicated to just ask the right questions so the person fills out the form by themselves. Do we want to keep going through questions or
Yes.
just Neil and I chit chat?
I have another question. It's the same company. So his company does not provide shared rides. They only provide private transportation services. How can Smartpoint help them improve the way they do business? And does Smartpoint have a website and contact information?
So they do. I believe it's smartpoint.co. And I think our contact info is there. So you're welcome, Smartpoint. Wasn't expecting that. They probably can. I mean, if you're providing private transportation services and you're trying to figure out where to try and meet your driver or vice versa, where the driver has to find the ride, you could actually pinpoint that to like within probably about a meter. I mean, I'll tell you a story where I was going to Istanbul for the first time, and you know the Turkish government had arranged a driver, all this stuff to pick me up, and they said, well, when you exit the arrivals area, the driver will be there with a sign. And I got out there, there was like literally 1,000 people with, you know, waiting for a family or whatever with signs and stuff. And I'm like, oh boy, you know, I'm looking around, I'm walking around, I don't see anybody with my name, circle around 4 or 5 times. And then finally I call, and they're like, oh, the driver's there. I'm like, where's the driver at? Well, he's standing in the arrivals area. Okay. Like where? And like, I don't know. So they went and called him, had a conversation. They called me back. They said, well, he's near the coffee shop. And I'm looking, there's 3 different coffee shops, you know? And so I went up, it took me an hour to find my driver as a result. So, I know it's one of those little nits, but imagine that, you know, you had a little thing like, you know, Smartpoint AI kind of guide to navigate to the person you're going to meet is right here. Right?
Yeah, your drop off and pickup points are pins on a map that you can absolutely navigate to instead of generic arrival areas.
Yep.
All right. Our next question is, I am a tennis teaching professional and now I have to adjust to the new normal. Some people are saying my profession will be gone and I'm looking into AI videos, online technology, etc., or a totally new career path. But the way I have a BA in psychology and regret not pursuing it further, master's PhD. Any suggestions?
So I love tennis coaches. I remember the Vic Braden tennis camps. Just a weird coincidence. I think tennis instruction is not going away. It's a perfect outdoor socially distanced activity. You might have to change how you're doing fundamental stuff, but I think there's a lot that you can do where you say, look, you're going to watch these videos in advance. You're going to videotape yourself with your phone because everyone has a camcorder now. So you're going to videotape yourself from 90 degrees or whatever with your phone. You're going to do all those things. And then when you and I come in person, we're going to be able to make the time more effective. So I think there's actually a way that in COVID, you could, you know, triple your business, not, you know, eke by, because it would force you to be more creative and use the tools that like a lot of the high end people use and a lot of the high end like golf simulation things. A lot of that now fits on a phone. Not everything, but, you know, enough. And tennis courts are freely available all over the place if you know where to find them. And so I think that there's a real opportunity for you to have a digital first Khan Academy style tennis camp that would totally work.
I definitely echo that. I don't know if you guys have seen the new mirror product, where it's literally a mirror, but you do exercise, and there's a coach, and it's watching you and see if you're doing it right, encouraging. I mean, you could tap into something like that. I mean, you could have people like Scott say video, but those might want to check out another Orange County startup called Cato Sports, where they're actually using AI to create lessons, right? And they're actually used by a couple NBA teams, a couple MLB teams. I don't know if they're doing tennis or not. So that's probably an opportunity for you. But they're actually giving people a way to try and practice their skills. And, they always talk about like muscle memory and those types of things. There's another way to, that they can, even if you can't teach them in person, another way for them to give them a chance to actually practice. So there's a chance to kind of coach, give them a way to practice so that, they're keeping up.
Yep.
Our next question is, how is AI helping with the recovery as a result of COVID-19 induced economic disaster?
There's a lot going on.
I'll give a very short answer, and Neil will give a much smarter answer. The government, including the SBA, doesn't want you to make money. It wants you to spend money. It wants you to push money through the economy. And so looking for ways to invest in things that push money through the economy is what the government is doing right now as part of the stimulus. And this is actually something I want to talk to you about, Neil, kind of tangentially, is like the way China has been able to invest in AI that the US has not, and not just about the ethics, but the actual financials. I think right now we're in a place where, the US government is looking where are the best, like long-term ROIs, not just roads and bridges, but, data infrastructure as well. So I'm interested in talking to you about that at length.
I'll talk about China in a second. On the COVID front, I mean, they are trying to tap into AI to help find a vaccine. I'll share something a little cool. There's a few groups that are combining AI with generative design, which is an engineering principle. And so basically, what you do is you don't say this is how I build something, or like how I build a plane or build a car. You give it parameters. It's like if it's a plane, it's like it has to have, it has to have thrust, has to have lift. You have to think about certain safety. So you might say like, I want to build a new type of plane that can carry 200 people, 14,000 miles, this level of fuel efficiency, blah, blah, blah. And what the AI does is it actually generates millions of designs. And it'll actually fabricate new materials we haven't thought of before to try and make some of these designs reality, and then discard some, bump some up, but depending on how well it fits, and come back with 5 to 12 designs to give human engineers. And we're doing this in healthcare, and people are trying to do this with COVID right now and say, could we kind of use generative design to figure out how the virus might mutate, or other viruses might mutate, or viruses we've never heard of before might occur, because we'll know that at a genomic level, we'll know what the spike proteins and some strands. I won't get too technical, sorry. But if we know that, we can actually then figure out a vaccine much faster, and in theory, even use generative design to figure out a vaccine and simulate some of these things to hopefully accelerate the clinical trial time. So there's a lot of work on that. There's actually a lot of work going on in food production with AI right now, because we've got strained supply chain, or in some cases they're broken. One of them is actually trying to figure out, is there a way to actually get food straight from farms to consumers? Because we have a lot of people actually going hungry, even in Orange County, and there's food that's literally just dying or rotting in the fields. Millions of gallons of milk are being dumped every day, just because we don't have a good way of trying to connect, the farmers with large groups of mass individual consumers. So this is another area where AI is talking about. And then Scott, when you're talking about like China has invested heavily. I mean, they've built a whole area called AI Town in Hangzhou, and China wants to be number one in AI, and right now they probably are, but they have a huge advantage over a lot of us in that they have tons and tons of data to make available for AI solutions. So, we talk about like contactless tracing and the stuff that, Apple and Google rolled out. China's actually had some of this stuff for a while now. They're using the visual cameras, the cameras in the streets. They're using the geolocation information in your phone, all these different factors to actually figure out that what's the risk factor for people, especially if someone suddenly tests positive for COVID. They know exactly who's been in contact with this person in the last, 7 days, I think it is. So that's a huge leg up, obviously, on us, but it shows you that, ethics and everything, privacy aside, the power that can be brought to bear, right? Because no one's probably thought of doing something like this before. You want to talk about innovation? But that, again, AI, it's given us a whole new set of tools to play with. The question is, what can we unlock with them?
And like bringing up that ethics piece, I think it's important when we talk about technology versus talking about specifically AI and technology. I think AI is a place where we don't want to move fast and break things and learn from our mistakes as much as possible. I think that the ability for AI to multiply mistakes is pretty severe compared to other stuff where you can kind of iteratively grow. And so it requires a little bit more coherent thought on the front end than a lot of other innovation.
It does, and we shouldn't just do something because we can, right? And we should have people work on stuff they don't understand. But with the protests and Black Lives Matter, people have been asking me that could we, reduce some of the prejudice in the system, reduce some of the police brutality and stuff? Could we have AI police officers? Could we have AI judges? And there's actually some of that actually out there, but very limited use. But the truth is that you just got to train the AI, right? Could we do it? Yeah, we could, but how are you going to train them? Think about the implicit bias. That's such a big problem for us that we might teach the AI the implicit biases we already have.
Because the training data you have is based on the problems that are fundamental in our system right now, but then you remove accountability, right? Or instead of having a judge that gets fired for doing a bad job, you're like, well, the robot said this is the sentence, so it must be right.
Yeah. And how are you going to do that? Scott, you used that example of the two student athletes that were both convicted.
Yeah.
Of. Yeah.
Yeah, I forget their names. It was two D1 high-level college athletes that were both convicted and guilty of raping an unconscious college student at parties. Different campuses, but the same year. One was black, one was white. The white guy got like 6 weeks in jail and probation, and the black guy got like 6 years. And neither of them had a criminal record, neither of them had anything, but it was just bias. And coding that into a black box and then just making it a robot is not a good thing. So we can't address those problems only with code. But code could help once we figure out solutions to implement them.
Well, I think that's a testament. We have a lot of power, but there's also a lot of limitations. AI is not like a magic bullet solution, and we have to think about how we really wield it, right? This is one of those cases where I always make the argument that we need a lot more philosophers and artists, because we have to be proactive in our thinking. We're going to trust machines to make decisions and recommendations. We have to kind of think through all the scenarios, good and bad. And, we're thinking about the experience and the other things, the behaviors. And the only way we're going to do that is more philosophers, more artists, and more diversity and inclusion in how we actually train AI.
Which goes back to asking better questions, right? Formulating the question better helps us get the better answers.
Yep.
All right. So our next question is, very interested in the Cyrano recursive neural network and how it processes deep listening and insights from Zoom. What types of insights of the meeting would you be able to deduce and take action on from this meeting?
Sure. Well, I don't want to turn this into a plug for my company. I really don't, because the SBDC has been great for me. And so I want to make sure we're honoring that. If you go to insights.cyrano.ai, there's a whole thing on what we did for Zoom. If you go to the Zoom marketplace and search for Meeting Insights or Cyrano, it'll come up there. But basically what we're tracking is a person's mental priorities, their communication style, and their level of commitment. So things that are non-obvious that humans naturally do. We're not just measuring sentiment. We're not measuring if you like this or not. We're figuring out how you're categorizing the information and what to do with that.
Well,
But thanks for asking.
Let me kind of pivot off that question though, because it's a good question, right? My experience is that we're our own worst enemy sometimes using AI, right? We limit ourselves because we either don't believe a machine can do it, or we don't believe a machine can do it better than a person. And don't get me wrong, there's plenty of things that people do better than machines, but Scott, you're talking about an area of like, artificial empathy, and what have you encountered? I mean, do you guys find any roadblocks trying to do the work that you did? Did you limit yourselves, or has it been more on trying to, how do I break through to potential customers and help them understand?
I mean, a big challenge for us was we built tech that we knew it had an intrinsic value, but we didn't have a fully formed out business plan around it, or the one we had was flawed, I should say. So we built a thing, and based on early success, we overbuilt and over-engineered because we had such good preliminary success, and we got a little bit over our skis. And so we were at it when we first launched. We were at a spot where the market wasn't ready for us, and we were telling people that our system could do stuff that people were just the cognitive dissonance, like they weren't listening to any of it. And that was a couple of years ago, and now we're at a spot where when we say we can do this, the people say, "Oh, you mean kind of like that?" And they have comps and they have things in their head, and that's been. We weren't sure if that was going to be a good thing or a bad thing. We weren't sure if that meant we were going to get passed up or if it would mean we were timing the market right. But a big challenge for us was simplifying and focusing on one deployment, which in this case is Zoom, and going to other platforms like Microsoft Teams or Cisco or any of those, or Google later, but just based on the easiest one to get into. Going where the data is, going where the people are. The APIs and the people were in Zoom, and so that's where we did it.
Oh, it makes sense. And look, I encourage everyone that don't limit yourselves. I know it's hard, or you think you're not doing that, but think about Hanes, right? They made men's undergarments for so long, and someone had the idea of like, what if we double our market size by making women's undergarments? And their first reaction was, that's a stupid idea. Right, women's undergarments are like different colors, fabrics, designs, but in retrospect, brilliant idea, right?
Yeah, that sounds like a whole bunch of different SKUs and opportunity to sell into a big market.
Yeah.
Neil, what's your thought in terms of the landscape right now of B2B versus B2C? Like, is one better than the other, like today?
I'll give the typical MBA answer, it depends.
Sure.
If you want good margins and good profitability, and you don't want to take the time and effort to build out your customer base, B2B is better, right? And generally speaking, it just always tends to have better margins. But you're becoming the engine behind something, right? You're not going to get the notoriety. Like, how many people really care about their Intel or Motorola processor, right? You might look at it when you buy your laptop or your device, and then you forget about it, right? B2C, there's more fame that way, more brand recognition. You can claim, millions of customers, but the amount of work, effort, and profitability is, different. It's a lot more work. It's less profitable. It just, I think, depends on what you want to do. Do you really have to reinvent your customer base or not? If you're talking about creating an AI digital assistant, right? One of the holy grails out there. Do you want to try and just sell that to every person in the world? Maybe, right? Everyone probably wants one. But if you're trying to say like, I want to create a super smart, empathetic chatbot, do you want to create that and then try and push it to every person in the world? Or you say like, you know what? There are all these companies that already have customers, right? They already have a need for this. Why don't I just become part of their solution, right? Be an engine for them.
Yeah, and that's, for Cyrano, we've built this B2C thing in Zoom because we want to be a B2B. But what we saw was during COVID, big businesses weren't ready to start new endeavors. And so we could go to where customers are and help customers who are in the middle of, changing and not trying to win the last war, but look at, okay, people are trying to figure out what they're going to do now that they're working from home. And that's why we launched B2C. But for us, B2B is the direction we want to take things.
Those are all the questions we have.
Cool. How much time do we have left? Like 10 minutes?
Yeah.
All right. What do you think, Neil? What else do we need to talk about? Any interesting topics?
Oh, we got a question.
All right. Just saved by the bell, Scott.
Yeah.
All right. Here we go. It's more of your opinion kind of thing. We are installing plexiglass on our vehicles between the drivers and the passengers, air purifiers, and a few other changes. My partners would like to install the AI system that manages people's temperatures. However, due to the fact that we provide private services, family or businesses, people traveling together, I do not see that the information in regards to the individual body temperatures is relevant. What is your thoughts?
If you're plexiglassing off an area and having a contained group of individuals, and I'm not like a virologist or anything like that, but if you're plexiglassing that off and then these people are going on vacation and they're going to interact with other people, like I think at some point, if you say these people are getting on a plane and traveling to new areas, there has to be some assumed exposure on those travelers' parts. And so I think you're not gonna find a version of this where you're the boy in the bubble travel agency where everyone lives in a bubble and goes and sees the Parthenon through a plexiglass dome. If people want to travel, they're gonna have to assume some level of risk. So mitigation makes sense, being responsible makes sense, but ultimately you have to think, are you trying to convince people who don't want to come, or are you just trying to make it safe for the people who feel comfortable?
Well, I think if I understand the question right, they're trying to figure out whether they really need to take or use AI thermal sensors to take temperature information. And I think that really depends on how much contact tracing, or, as Scott's talking about liability, but, we just heard the story about New Zealand, where I think they hadn't had a new case of COVID in like a month, and they declared themselves COVID free. And then two women came from the UK. I think they had a dying relative. You're supposed to self-quarantine for 14 days, but I think after 10 days, they said, no, it should be fine. And you go out and guess what? They actually both contracted COVID, or I guess they had it and they just took it.
They had it, yeah.
Yeah. And so now suddenly all these people are worried about, were they exposed? They only use private drivers. They didn't use public transportation. Well, we know how this works, right? If that private driver got exposed, then that person probably maybe exposed his family, maybe some friends, who may expose some coworkers, right? This is how exponential growth happens.
Yep.
So if you're generally concerned about that, you're generally concerned about liability, it might be worth investing in those kind of AI thermal temperature testing, right? Because if you do detect something, at least it's an early warning sign, right? I mean, the big thing is that people are sick but don't show signs yet, and that's how this really spreads.
That's all the questions.
Cool.
Well, Scott, I'm going to ask you one last question here. What do you think the future should be, right? We have all these great people here who are thinking about what to do and how to rebuild and take advantage of the opportunities in the COVID-19 world. What's like one piece of advice to help them get started?
I think people in the last few months have gotten a glimpse of how their life could be different if they weren't doing 50-hour work weeks. And I think the idea of technology was so that we wouldn't have to work so much. And what happened was we became, instead of, oh, I can take my phone everywhere, that means I don't have to work. It meant, oh, I'm always at work because I have my phone with me. And really very Simon Sinek sort of thoughts. And I think this has helped people kind of jar them on where their work-life balance was on a continuum. And I think that is going to be addressed by everybody. And there's going to be shock when some people go back and they're like, I did this for how long? And I think that's going to want to be addressed. What do you think?
Well, first I was going to say, if people are working less, you're going to have to tell me what I'm doing wrong, because I feel like I'm working more and
I
starting
am too, yeah.
Zoom screen like 10 hours a day. I agree with you, and I think that, look, like I said, COVID has shown the light on all these deficiencies, all these things that were good enough, they're no longer good enough, and rather than let's just repair, let's really rebuild, right? Let's find a new way of doing this. Let's be innovators. Let's be disruptors. And just do it differently. And
I'm really surprised VR didn't have a bigger moment in the last few months. Like, I think it was a wasted opportunity or a lost opportunity for VR, because I'm a fan of VR technology, and I can't wait to sit courtside at every sporting event, you know, but it didn't hit. I don't know why.
I don't know. It takes a little time, but I wouldn't write VR off. Interestingly enough, you know, being a part-time faculty at Irvine,
Right.
you know, there's always been this talk about move to hybrid online classes, and we never go all online, and people like that's probably 10, 15 years away. And then we literally had to do it overnight, right?
Yeah.
So for 10 years talking about this thing is so far away, do it overnight, and people have seen how successful it is that now there's active talk about, can we actually make the shift to VR classes? So kind of taking this resistance to change away, and now train everyone into kind of innovators. It's like, wait, how can we reshape this whole experience?
Yeah, I think people have been much more likely to experiment with those kinds of things as a result of COVID. I think that's going to be awesome.
Well, thank you so much, Neil and Scott. It was a fantastic conversation, really thought-provoking insights. Thanks so much to everyone for joining today. And we'll be sending a copy of the webinar to everyone tomorrow via email. We also have a presentation tomorrow on debt financing by TGG Accounting, so join us for that. And if you have any other questions, please email hkhaled@fullerton.edu in the chat. Thanks again so much, guys. Really great conversation. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Pleasure.